Just a quick one, talk a little bit about exercise in the heat or long-term exercise in the heat, and then getting into a little bit of heat stress type of failure states. Uh, so we've talked a number of times about this idea of cardiovascular drift. Again, as we start exercising longer in the heat, this is something that we are more than likely going to see. As exercise continues, just in general, stroke volume goes down. If we are sweating, we are sending more blood to the skin that is being vasodilated, which means pressure is going to be down. It means less venous return, so we're going to have a decrease in stroke volume there. And as sweating increases over time, we are going to drop in plasma volume. What this really means is for any particular level of output, we are going to have to compensate by having an increased heart rate for whatever that submaximal workload is. It also means our maximal workload is going to be less. And as the longer we do this, those decreases in plasma volume over time are going to increase this cardiovascular drift. So that heart rate is going to continue to climb, continue to climb. And this can also be a problem at really high levels of intensity. Sometimes that circulatory regulation can override the thermal mechanisms here and lead to vasoconstriction in the periphery, which can lead to you taking on a large amount of heat in terms of heat storage and can get you into a dangerous heat position with the body. Again, a lot of this has to do with the blood getting out in those peripheral veins, along with sweating increases is going to lead to those decreases in plasma volumes. This again leads to less venous return, less preload, which leads to lower stroke volume and therefore a much higher cardiac output to maintain all of this. And again, we're also going to have some of the fluids getting pushed to the tissues as well as loss of those fluids through sweating. Again, that can put you into this heat strain type of environment. We do try to stop sending as much blood to the viscera. This can be dangerous sometimes. It does cause a problem also in terms of any type of clearance of anaerobic kind of oxygen debt type of things. But we are also going to have decreased visceral blood flow depending on the exercise intensity and the temperature overall. If we get to, like I said, too high of an intensity, that cardiovascular kind of mechanism will take over and we'll get less blood flow to the skin for that particular core temperature. And again, that can put you into a dangerous position. That venoconstriction of those cutaneous veins, trying to keep that up. We will try to maintain volume a lot of times before that with increased water and sodium reabsorption. So a lot of this can look familiar from A&P too. But you can see there's kind of some of the different mechanisms that as we are starting to lose plasma volume, the things we can do to maintain it. So kind of that whole little thing here kind of saying if you get a decrease in plasma volume, blood pressure is going to drop. One of the things we'll try to do is lower our GFR, so that glomerular filtration rates. We're not making as much filtrate, we're not making as much urine. One of the effects of the kidney as well is we can get plasma, we can get renin released from the kidney, which is going to lead to increased angiotensin II levels, which is a vasoconstrictor. It's also going to lead to increased secretion of aldosterone, which is going to lead to increased sodium reabsorption, less excretion of sodium, and it's also going to lead to water reabsorption. The other thing is, a lot of this is going to lead to an ADH secretion, which is going to try to increase our water reabsorption and less water loss. All these things can, when we're having severe sweating, help to maintain that water balance so we can continue to sweat. Again, if we start losing enough fluids, this is where it can be dangerous. Generally, 1% of body weight loss, you're going to definitely probably be a little bit thirsty. When we start getting into higher levels, 2 to 3% would probably affect of body weight loss due to dehydration. Is going to start affecting more endurance activities. Really, once you start getting above that 5%, you're starting to get into more dangerous areas here where definitely going to feel like you can't go very much at all at 5%. And then you start getting into these dangerous areas where you don't get any saliva happening, decreased sweating, and again, you lose enough water, it can lead to death. So generally on short events, anything that's sprint stuff, generally even 2%, 3% dehydration won't have an effect. But you would definitely see this in any type of long-term endurance activities such as running, as well as sports where you're continually going, continue to run without stopping for a long period of time. You'll see a decrease in performance on these. The other thing that a lot of times you have to run, you run the risk of it at a lot of these events, especially you're doing stuff in heat, is sometimes you have to be careful with dehydration, definitely with elite athletes, but a lot of times with recreational athletes or these really long-term events like ultra marathons and things like that, there's usually a greater risk of hyponatremia, which is taking on too many liquids. Generally with dehydration, we do not want any more than a 2% body weight loss. So a lot of this is going to be a lot of the recommendations they say down here, where fluids that have high hydration, you're going to be adjusting fluids as you're doing this one. Try not to lose much in the way of weight. Measure your weight prior to and during competition. They actually do that in a lot of the high-level ultra marathons. They will be weighing you at different aid stations, and if you lose too much weight, they pull you from the race so you do not get dehydrated. The other thing is replacing electrolytes and carbs during the event. Hyponatremia is if you drink, like let's say somebody that's doing like a 5-hour marathon that's drinking 3 or 4 glasses of water at every aid station. That actually leads to dilution of the blood, or your electrolyte levels get too low. And in a lot of cases, it's actually more dangerous than dehydration. This can get you unconscious into a death state, sometimes a lot easier than dehydration. Generally, with dehydration, most people are going to stop long before they get to the levels of dehydration that are going to be an issue. Heat cramps, these ones sometimes dehydration, it's more than anything, I think most of the time cramps with exertion especially are altered neuromuscular control, where you have different proprioceptors kind of getting a disconnect as they fatigue, and your kind of reflex arcs are going to be kind of trying to deal with that by sometimes making that muscle spasm when you're not wanting to contract it. If it was just electrolyte imbalances, more than just the working muscles generally would have that cramping. That being said, if you do dehydrate enough, you could have kind of all over body cramps if you're doing too long. But generally, exertional muscle cramps are not the thermal distress type, but more of just long-term use of that muscle. Generally, you want to hydrate well on these ones. Make sure you're doing enough electrolytes. If you can train for this, like I said, if you're getting to this point, rest, stretch, stop what you're doing. This is usually on that lower end of the spectrum in terms of heat issues. As you go further down this continuum, you are going to sweat a lot for a while. If your core temp is starting to go up here, your skin will start getting cooler, but what's happening is it's trying to dissipate a ton of heat from the core. You generally will have a rapid but weak pulse because the blood pressure is too low. You're vasodilating too much, and it gives you that faint feeling, the dizziness. And generally, if they were to take your blood pressure, it'd be a lot lower. At this point, you should stop all activity. If you continue to work through this, you are going to get to a bad place. Generally, if you're in the heat, move to someplace cool, stop your activity, rehydrate, take in some electrolytes to kind of get back to a better place. But it really should not continue activity when you're at this level of heat exhaustion. Heat stroke is definitely a medical emergency. If all of a sudden you stop sweating, this means you are not far from being in a very dangerous position, which would be a lot of times loss of consciousness or very profound confusion. It's going to lead to extremely high heart rates and breathing. And if your core temp gets much higher, then like I said, your core temps can get above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. If you get a core temp much above that, you are in a dangerous position where you're going to have body systems starting to shut down. Not something you want to have happening. And again, this just kind of shows you that continuum in terms of heat illnesses and where they can be an issue. Again, once you start getting into this area, you should be, if you're getting nauseous from being in the heat, this is about the time you should be stopping. If you're nauseous, have a headache, quit your activity, cool down, do it a different day. And again, it's generally the more serious, you want to keep them cool. I mean, sometimes you will put cold compresses in the groin, the armpits, remove clothing if they're in the really, real serious. Generally, initially, it's just find a cool place, drink fluids. Again, if it gets really bad, go to the hospital or have somebody take you to the hospital, call an ambulance. And this just kind of shows you why this can be an issue. A lot of this, when you start getting this high temperatures, it starts affecting the brain in terms of glycogen depletion in the brain. It's going to lead to central nervous system impairment, and then those type of things, if that goes on for too long, that can be very, very dangerous to the body. So what we'll be doing on the next set of videos here is looking more at kind of the long-term effects of heat training and how we can get these adaptations over 7 to 14 days of being in the heat that will help us in these conditions, either just being in a hot environment or exercising in a hot environment. What are the changes that happen in terms of kind of evaporative cooling, sweat concentrations, things like that. So I will see you next time.